Hi, welcome to the Quick Start GRE Crash Course video series. In this video, we'll continue our discussion about the AWA argument task. If you haven't seen the first one, please do go watch it. I'll link you up in the description. So in part 1 of this series, we went over the general instructions for this task. We went over how to prepare, how to divide your time while writing this essay, and we also understood what ETS might ask you in the instructions accompanying the actual argument. Now we'll go over what kinds of reasoning flaws usually show up in these arguments. We'll understand how to write the essay, what format to follow, and finally, we'll take a look at 2 sample questions from the actual ETS pool. We'll look at the instructions and accordingly understand what to write in the essay. We'll learn to identify logical reasoning flaws within the author's arguments. We'll learn to choose the strongest among them and then draft out the essay using those points. So let's dive right in. These are the various types of problems an author's argument might have. It's not limited to these, of course. The types of fallacies could potentially be infinite. But generally, like overall, these cover most of the types of fallacies that you might have to identify in the GRE argument tasks. If you're really looking to score maybe a 6 or 5.5, do go ahead and do a little bit of research on the internet, find out more types of logical fallacies that could exist, and really dig your teeth into it. For now, let's go over the ones I've listed here. The first one is vague or ambiguous words. So assume that you're trying to make an argument for something. Assume that you're doing some kind of scientific experiment and you're trying to make a very logical, properly thought out argument for a cause. And assume if you and think about it, if you use words like many or more or less or some, doesn't that poke holes in your argument? Like suppose you're trying to prove that city A is better than city B. And then you choose to say things like city A has happier people than city B, city A has better roads, city A has more shopping complexes. The words more, the words better, they're very figurative. They're not derived from statistics. They're not derived from numbers, and it doesn't really present a very strong argument. So this is a flaw that could be present in an analytical argument section. Another flaw is making incorrect comparisons. The author could be making comparisons between two objects without really taking into consideration all the parameters. Okay, take the example of city A and city B again, and the author could be saying something like city A implemented. We'll come to this example. In fact, we'll see an example which is exactly like this. City A implemented a road improvement project, and it worked really well. He'll give some statistics. It brought down accidents by 50%, or it took 1 year to reduce the number of accidents from 5,000 to 2,000. Some kind of statistics he'll give to show how City A's road improvement project worked really well. And then he'll be saying something like, City B should implement it because if it worked for City A, it'll work for City B. That's an incomplete or incorrect comparison because you don't really know the parameters under which City A and City B operate. You don't know the geography of both the cities, you don't know the population of both the cities, you don't know the amount of money both the cities have to spend on such road improvement projects. Even things as subtle as the amount of corruption. So, even if City B, say, implements a road improvement project, because of corruption and because of the money assigned to that project being diluted further and further and further, maybe the implementation isn't very good. He can't really make a direct comparison between City A and City B without proving that City A and City B are in fact comparable entities. Coming to the third type of flaw, this includes errors in causality. Basically, what this says is the author assumes that X causes Y. This might not necessarily be the case. Y could be caused by an entirely different thing, or X could in fact be caused by Y. Sometimes the author completely reverses the causality. Take, for example, something like the statement students of Rushmore High have stopped coming to school because of the increase in noise pollution in the school. Now, okay, so it's a fact that students of Rushmore High have stopped coming into school. That's a fact. But has it necessarily been caused by the noise pollution in the school? How can the author say without concrete proof or concrete evidence, some kind of reports? The students could not be coming because they're unwell. The students could not be coming because the teachers don't teach well. The students could not be coming because of some mass epidemic disease. It could be anything. It need not be caused by noise pollution in the school. So that's errors in causality. The next type of flaw is incorrect sampling. This basically means that an author talks about a small sample and talks about a phenomena that occurs in that small sample. This could be proved by some kind of statistics or some kind of report. And then he tries to generalize it and he tries to make a conclusion saying that if it exists in the small sample, it will exist everywhere. Uh, let's take the example of a park in a city. And the author says that people in this park come early in the morning. So we should make sure that the facilities early in the morning are good to use, or something like that. He'll make some kind of statement saying that people in this park come early in the morning. And there's statistics to prove it. He can prove that people in this particular park come only early in the morning. The problem is that he will try to generalize this phenomenon and say that it exists all over the city. He'll try to say that if in this park people come only early in the morning and we should improve the facilities in the morning for this park, we should do it for the city, the entire city, because if it happens in this park, it'll happen everywhere. That's incorrect sampling. You can't just take a very small sample and try to apply it to the entire population. The next flaw is stating things too strongly. In my opinion, this flaw is a little weaker than the others uh, because it doesn't really derive on mathematics or statistics as such. Saying something too strongly is a flaw because the author gives might give lukewarm assumptions at best, which might or might not be accurate, and then make a strong statement saying something like this should undoubtedly be the policy of this country or the foreign policy of this country. If he uses words like undoubtedly or surely or we have to implement something like this, it's a flaw because you can't really be so sure about something without being absolutely sure in your statistics. So even though this is a flaw in logical reasoning, it in my opinion it's a little weak, and if you find other better flaws, try to use those instead of this one. The next flaw in logical reasoning is stereotyping. The author could stereotype saying that this man is a bad driver, hence all men are bad drivers. He won't explicitly stereotype, but from his language, you will understand that if he's trying to attribute the properties of one person or a small group of individuals to the entire population, that's stereotyping, which is similar to taking a very small sample and making conclusions about the entire population about using that. Uh, the next type of flaw is anecdotal, which means that the author will derive from his own stories and take them as truth. So the author will tell you his own personal story. We'll see this in the upcoming example, um, where the author talks about his own experience selling a house, and he says that this has happened with me. So he kind of just assumes that it'll happen with everybody, which is a flaw in reasoning because you can't make assumptions that just because it's happened with you, it'll happen with everybody. Essentially, his arguments should draw from statistics or numbers or some kind of report. Finally, the last type of flaw I want to talk to you about, and the list doesn't end here, so please do go do your research if you do want to score a very high score. But the last type of flaw that I'll be addressing is using inappropriate stats. So let's take the example of India and say Germany. And you say something like 75% of Germans are educated, but only 25% of Indians are educated. So the intent of this statement is to kind of convey that Indians are not educated, or very few Indians are educated because only 25% of India is educated. But if you think about it, India's population is way higher than that of Germany. So sometimes directly giving percentages without kind of implying the numbers around it, for example, the size, the sample size, the size of the population, the size of whatever data you're dealing with, is a flaw in any assumption that the author makes. These were the flaws that I've come across in the various essays that I've read, the various argument questions that I've read. But do remember that if you're aiming for a very high score, like a 6, uh, go do your research and completely get well versed with what types of logical reasoning fallacies exist and which ones you can target in your own essay. Okay. Now that you've understood the common types of flaws that the author's argument might possess, let's talk about actually writing the essay. There's a simple rule for the format of this essay. Tell them what you'll talk about it, and then tell them what you just talked about. Another point to remember is that the best technique to scoring high is to keep it simple. Usually, a linear thought process which informs the readers what they're about to read, takes them over what the actual material is, and then concludes in a sound way. Usually, that scores the highest point. It might be unwise to use flowery language or flowery flow. You don't want to take the risk doing that. Depending on the instruction prompt, you could try and word your essay out in this manner. This is the format that I used in my exam and I scored a 5. So I was pretty happy with this format. I hope it helps you. Basically, you introduce what you're going to be writing about. You write about the three main flaws or the three main pieces of evidence that you require, or whatever your instruction prompt asks you, and then you conclude. Your introduction might encompass the gists of the points that you will be writing about. Use the next three paragraphs to actually address the flaws in the author's assumptions, or use it to address the evidence or the questions that need need to supplement the author's assumptions, or any other alternative explanations for the facts presented by the author. This completely depends on your question prompt. Finally, conclude with a summary of all the points that you just mentioned. That's it. Keep it very, very simple, keep it very, very straightforward, very linear, and don't complicate your essay. Don't make it difficult for the reader to understand where you're going with your thought process. Tell them what you're going to be talking about, talk about it, and then tell them what you just talked about. Okay, so let's get right into example 1. You can pause the video now, read the question once or twice, and also be sure to understand the instruction prompt. And then we'll talk about it. Let's go over what the author says once before identifying the argument and the assumptions. Okay, let's go over the last line. The author's main point here is to tell us, hey, if you want to sell your home quickly and at a good price, you should use Adams Realty. This is his argument. This is what he wants to prove with the entire paragraph that he's written. What comes above is what he thinks will support the argument. But the underlying argument is, if you want to sell your home quickly or at a good price, you should use Adams Realty and not Fitch Realty. Let's quickly go over what he thinks are the determining factors for this conclusion that he's given, and then I'll take you over what his underlying assumptions are, and what the flaws are in his underlying assumptions, and how to kind of go about answering this essay. So the first thing that he says is that of the two leading firms in this town, Adams Realty is clearly superior. This is the same thing as his argument. This is pretty much just corroborating his argument. It's the same statement. The reasons for this superiority he gives. The first one is that Adams has 40 agents and Fitch has 25, out of which a lot of them work part time. That's his first assumption, as well as that's his first supporting statement. The second point that he gives in favor of Adams being better is that last year Adams' revenue was double that of Fitch, and uh, their home sales averaged at $160,000, and Fitch's home sales averaged at $144,000. This is his second point. His third point is that homes with Adams sell faster. And why does he say this? He says this because 10 years ago, with Fitch, it took him 4 months, and last year with Adams, it took him 1 month. Okay, so these were all of the points that he gives in support for his arguments. Now let's see what's wrong with these points. Okay, just read the first statement in bold. Adam has 40 real estate agents and Fitch has only 25, many of which work part time. So this is supposed to make us believe that Adams is superior in quality or in getting a good price for your house and getting selling your house quickly. Clearly just an assumption. There's no evidence to support that 40 real estate agents might be better than Fitch's 25 real estate agents. Maybe Fitch's 25 real estate agents are supremely qualified. Maybe they're very good at their job. Maybe they get your house sold very, very quickly and at a very good price. And maybe all 40 of Adam's real estate agents are idiots who don't know their job. This is an extreme, of course, but it's possible, right? So just because Adams has more real estate agents, it does not guarantee superiority in quality. So that's point number one. Point number two is that the author says that Adams' revenue last year was twice as high as that of Fitch. Again, there is no evidence to support that more revenue means they're doing a better job at selling your house. It has nothing to do with how quickly or at how good a price they sell your houses. A higher revenue might just mean completely inflated service charges. Maybe they're making so much revenue because they're fleecing their customers, and maybe they take a lot of money from their customers, which actually means the opposite of selling your house for a good price, because you'll actually be making compromises in the amount you're selling your house for. The author also talks about the average home sale values for Adams and for Fitch. And he shows that the average home sale value for Adams is much higher than that for Fitch, which again is supposed to imply that Adams is superior in quality. Again, this is an incorrect assumption because there is no evidence to support that $144,000 is because of lesser quality or because of inferiority as compared to Adams. It might be possible that Fitch deals with smaller sized homes, which is why their average home sale is lesser than that of Adams. It's possible, and the author makes an assumption that it's because of higher quality. Okay, come to the next one. The author says that 10 years ago he sold his house with Fitch. It took him 4 months to sell. And 1 year ago he sold his house with Adams and it took him 1 month to sell. This is an incorrect comparison example because he's trying to compare a situation from 10 years ago to a situation from 1 year ago without indicating that the parameters involved have been the same. There is no way of knowing that 10 years ago the housing market was in the same scenario as it was 1 year ago. It might have been really bad back then, it might have been really, really good last year, which could account for the discrepancy in the time it took for Fitch to sell versus the time it took for Adams to sell. So it has no direct correlation to superiority in quality or how good Adams might be as a real estate firm. So again, this is incorrect comparison. This is a direct flaw that the author makes in his assumption. Another big flaw with this assumption, is that this whole supporting statement to the argument is anecdotal. This whole scenario is about one person, one house, two houses, one situation. That this particular author sold one house 10 years ago and sold one house 1 year ago. And he's trying to kind of generalize his situation to the entire population. Again, a flaw in his argument. So, so if you remember your instruction prompt, it asks you to examine the stated or unstated assumptions, and it asks you to examine how it would affect the argument if these assumptions were actually false or if they were not correctly done. So, what you're going to do in your essay is the first introduction paragraph will basically highlight all of these points in, say, one sentence each, and kind of give a premise to the paragraphs to come. You'll introduce each of these points. In the next paragraph, you will talk about the first point, which is the 40 real estate agents versus 25. You'll give your 2 cents and you'll explain why it's an incorrect assumption. And then you'll talk about what it implies if this assumption was actually wrong. So think about it. If Adams's 40 real estate agents all actually turn out to be pretty bad at their jobs, and Fitch has 25 glorious real estate agents, this statement actually implies that Fitch is better in quality and Fitch will sell your home quickly and at a good price. So it's kind of it's antithetical of what the author wants to imply. So if this assumption is actually incorrect, it completely nullifies the author's argument. Similarly, you can use this same format to indicate that every other assumption as well. If it actually turns out to be wrong, it can nullify or thoroughly weaken the author's argument. So that was example number one for you. We went over reading and understanding the argument, understanding what the argument exactly is, understanding what the assumptions are that the author makes, and understanding the possible flaws in his assumptions and what they could do for his argument at the end of the day. One parting note that I would want to leave you with for this particular essay is that in your conclusive paragraph, try to acknowledge the fact that the author might be right. Try to say something like, while Adams might actually be the superior of the two firms and might actually sell your home quickly and at a good price, the author does not provide sufficient evidence to corroborate this fact. And you can write something along those lines, and that will really give a wholesome feel to your essay, where you acknowledge that the author might be right, but you've pointed out a lot of glaring flaws in his assumptions, which is why you have critically analyzed this argument and critically deemed it to be not very sound in logic. Coming to example number two, you can pause the video now and take a moment to read through this question, including the instruction prompt, and resume when you're done reading it once or twice. So the instruction prompt for this one is different from the one that you saw in example number one. This one asks you to discuss what specific evidence is needed to evaluate this argument and explain how that particular evidence would weaken or strengthen the argument. The last one was simply to identify the unstated or stated assumptions and then elaborate on that. Here it wants you to expound on what kind of evidence would really give some kind of logical backing to this example. Uh, okay, so let's go over what this argument says. The eventual argument that is stated in this paragraph is that Prunty County should undertake the same kind of road improvement project that Butler County did 5 years ago. That's the argument. The author wants to put it forward that Prunty County would really benefit if they undertook the same kind of road improvement that Butler County did last year. And he gives a number of reasons to kind of support that argument. Your job is to poke holes in those reasons. Not only poke holes, also ask questions, demand for evidence, which would help you analyze this argument better. What kind of evidence can the author provide you with? What kind of reports, what kind of numbers can he give you that will help you make the judgment whether this road improvement project will actually benefit Prunty County or not? Let's look at how to go about this example. So we've identified the argument that the author makes. The author the author wants to say that Prunty County should undertake the same kind of road improvement project as Butler County because clearly their current efforts have failed. That's what the author wants to say. Now, the assumptions that he makes to prove his point, we'll go over them step by step, and let's look at what kind of evidence the author can give you to prove his point. Okay? So the first assumption that the author makes, is that the efforts that Prunty County has already employed, all of those efforts have failed because the number of accidents has not decreased. Okay, so the number of accidents has not decreased, and hence he concludes that the efforts have failed. Two things here. The word fail is very subjective. So if he could define the word failing in terms of numeric understanding, and even if the number of accidents has not decreased, it could be possible that the magnitude of these accidents, that the magnitude, the severity of these accidents has reduced. It could be that the accidents are very minor now. The magnitude of these accidents, the damages caused are very, very little. So that's point number one. Can the author provide evidence to show that the efforts actually failed and that the number of accidents has not decreased, as well as the magnitude of accidents hasn't decreased either? And can he define the word failing? The second assumption comes based on reports given by the highway patrol. Now the thing is, you don't know anything about these reports. You don't know what the sample set of these reports were. You don't know whether it covered probably maybe just one road. What if the reports just covered one road? Then it's not a big enough sample set that deterministically can say anything. So maybe information about that report, how or those reports, whether they're accurate, how big are the sample sets, that they cover all the areas of Prunty County. Um, Information regarding those reports will definitely help you understand this argument better. The third point is that the author says many drivers are exceeding the speed limit. Uh, as we saw before, the word many is very vague and is not based on statistics or numbers. So, if the author could provide data regarding the word many, what does he mean many drivers are exceeding the speed limit? Does he have numbers? Were there 100 drivers breaking the speed limit? Were there 1,000? What does many qualify as? The next point, point number D, is that Butler County implemented this whole road improvement project where they increased lane widths, they did resurfacing, and they improved visibility. Now, again, this is comparison. This might be incorrect comparison between Butler and Prunty County because, for all you know, Prunty County might not need such road improvement projects in the sense that Prunty County might already have bigger lanes, might already have good visibility at intersections, might have already implemented all of this. So you're making comparisons without providing evidence that the two are comparable. So you have to ask the author for evidence regarding the parameters of this comparison. Are the geographies of Prunty County and Butler County the same? Are the lane widths in Prunty County actually smaller, or are they already bigger than Butler County? The visibility conditions at dangerous intersections between both counties. There needs to be some kind of evidence stating the fact that both these counties can be compared. Finally, the author talks about the fact that there were 25% fewer reported accidents in Butler County. Um, Again, the term 25% is it's very subjective. It could mean anything. 25% of 100 reported accidents, for example, is not such a big number, but 25% of 10,000 reported accidents might actually be a big number. So provide actual reports with numbers to show the efficiency of the Butler County road improvement project. Furthermore, this particular point only talks about reported accidents. What about unreported accidents? You don't know anything about unreported accidents. So, although this isn't a very strong point, which is why I haven't mentioned it here, if this is also a thought line of thinking that you could have followed. So we've come up with five assumptions that the author is making, and five pieces of evidence that he could have provided you, which would have helped you analyze his argument. And you also have to explain how this evidence will strengthen or weaken his argument. For example, uh, let's take point number C. He talks about many drivers exceeding the speed limit. What if this word many actually signifies 100,000 drivers? See, a number as big as 100,000 drivers. That's a big number. 100,000 drivers exceeding the speed limit, even though Prunty County lowered its speed limit, is a problem, and that might actually qualify as failing. So that would strengthen his argument. But if for him many is just five drivers, for example, that could weaken his argument. Similarly, go over each and every point in the list that you've made and think about how that evidence would strengthen or weaken his argument. And then place it in the same format that we discussed for the last example. Well, there you have it, guys. That's the end of the crash course on analytical writing argument section. Prepare well, have the question types ingrained in your mind, understand what they ask, understand the kinds of flaws that you might be faced with, practice at least 2 to 3 essays, probably go over those 11 questions which were of the blue instruction type, and best of luck. Do well.